Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. We have an exciting series for you this year, whether you are preparing to implement, migrate, or you've already gone live with S/4HANA. It is important to know there are major differences between ECC and S/4, so you can leverage the full capabilities of your SAP investment. Today, while Ecliph and David will take about 30 minutes and guide you through the differences of S/4 and ECC's production finite scheduling. We encourage you to capture any questions in the question or chat. We will have time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions you may have. At this time, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Ecliph and David. Ecliph is an integration advisor with Reveal and has 20+ years of experience supporting many business processes with SAP functionality. David is an integration advisor with Reveal with over 20+ years of experience in a variety of roles across manufacturing and supply chain businesses. Please let's welcome David and Ecliph.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. Hey, David, good to see you.
Hey, Ecliph, nice to see you.
Hey, folks, welcome to this Reveal webinar. The expectation is to discuss what to expect when we migrate from ECC to S/4HANA.
Slide.
Yep. Okay, so here what we're showing here is it's a representation of a typical supply chain. I say typical from the perspective of the fact that we do operational planning. From there, we develop a forecast, a sales forecast, which we put into demand management. MRP runs. From there, we get a supply plan or production plan, and from there, we end up executing. So our focus really is what is within this blue box here. When speaking about the migration from ECC to S/4HANA. So when MRP runs, we can see here that in ECC we typically just have MRP. In the S/4HANA, we have different planning engines. We have MRP Live, we have MRP Classic, as well as PPDS and SMP, which we'll talk more about. From there, we end up doing finite scheduling or detailed scheduling, which takes capacity into consideration to try and make that production plan realistic, hence the schedule. And then finally, we go ahead and execute that production plan with the intent of, one, ensuring that we do get raw materials in a timely manner to fulfill the production requirements, as well as getting that inventory so we can then fulfill customer orders, fulfill production lines, and so forth. And again, our focus is from the production planning process right down to execution. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Now, I think we jumped one too many. So what we're showing here is on the left-hand side is basically it's a representation of the legacy solution when coming from an ECC environment. You may just have ECC where we have the MRP solution as well as the finite scheduling. And when this migrates to S/4HANA, it will migrate to where we have MRP Classic, MRP Live, finite scheduling, and also embedded PPDS. David, do you want to speak about the SCM APO solution from a legacy to the new environment?
Right, yeah. So in the APO SCM world, we had a whole bunch of products. One of them was supply network planning. Another one was PPDS. And the two systems, and this was a separate system to your ECC environment. So what would happen is that you would have some data in ECC and some data in PPDS, and you'd have this thing called the core interface that moved data between the two platforms. With the introduction of S4 HANA, SAP have added ePPDS, embedded PPDS, to the S4 platform. So data is now managed in one system, S4. Majority of your data is managed in one system. There's some of the most of the functionality that you used to have in the APO environment for PPDS has been moved to S4, excepting some functionality like cable to promise, which we hope will be released in the near future. Ecliph, question for you. How does the existing MRP solution work in S4HANA?
Sure, David. So I spoke about, MRP and the finite scheduling. When the solution moves from ECC to S4HANA, what happens is the existing solution in ECC has now migrated to S4HANA as MRP Classic. So the functionality, hence the logic of MRP is an exact copy of what you found in MRP ECC. Then we have the new version of MRP, which is referred to as MRP Live. The intent of SAP is to migrate 100% to MRP Live, but right now, some of the logic, some of the planning scenarios don't exist in MRP Live, and this is why SAP has retained MRP Classic. So some of, like, for example, the consumption-based planning does not exist in Live as yet, hence we have to rely on Classic. And then from a finite scheduling perspective, the concept is the same. So be it a tabular solution or a graphical solution on the ECC side, that exists in the S4 environment. So these are the different solutions, and plus there's more, but again, we'll explore that a little bit over on the S4 HANA side. So Dave, when would we choose to use the S4 HANA solution? Sorry, in S4 HANA, when would we choose to use the PPDS solution?
Well, I think firstly, if you're currently using an APO PPDS solution and you upgrade to S4 HANA, then obviously using PPDS, getting the PPDS license in S4 is probably your easiest and most logical solution. Once you have started working with PPDS, you'll realize that the power of the solution is built around these flexible heuristics, which you use for planning and scheduling. The heuristic is actually a program which uses an algorithm to provide a very powerful manufacturing planning and scheduling tool. Are we on slide 8? We should be on slide 8.
Yes. Okay. This is slide 9.
Slide 9, yeah, one back. So if we look at the structure of the embedded PPDS system, you'll see that your single source of data is sitting on the S4 environment. So your material master, your business partners, your customers and vendors, your bill of materials, your work centers and operations are all maintained in S4HANA, and it feeds into the PPDS solution. The transactional data as well, all your transactional data is moving backwards and forwards. But the important thing here is that your primary data, your material master, your bills of material, and your customers and vendors are maintained only in one system, making it much easier to manage how data moves. There are a couple of exceptions, of course, which SAP have not put into the same platform, and things like subcontract purchasing for records, MRP areas, and classes and characteristics, which are examples of data elements that we came across on a recent project with a client, and this was the only way we could move it from an S4 environment and get it planned in a PPDS environment. So some of the advantages of using PPDS, I think it's on the next slide. Yep. So in the new S4 environment, it's possible to have both PPDS plans and your traditional S4 plans running on a single transaction. So that has the advantage of making things very simple for you to run. It does a low-level code calculation, which means it goes through your bill of material and decides which is the parent and which is the sub-item, and it links those together all in one nice, easy transaction. Of course, as I mentioned previously, is simplified master data and integration data. PPDS supports finite or infinite scheduling, capacity scheduling. Some clients need to be able to batch manage, include batch management, shelf life planning in their schedule, so they're using the most up to the minute data. PPDS supports characteristic dependent planning, very important to some industries such as automotive. The heuristics that we mentioned, there's a number of different heuristics which the users can actually tweak and fit to their requirements. In addition, we have a very powerful solution around alerts, enabling the business to get up-to-date information on the different parts of the system. So the alert gives you an instantaneous warning or error message, and these alerts are dynamically calculated as the user executes a transaction. So very useful to be able to know that you have a problem, and every time you go into a transaction. So I think we're on slide 10 now, right, Ecliph?
Yep.
So how does the S4 solution complement? Is it complemented with Fiori apps?
Okay. So from a user perspective, there's more than one way a user can access a transaction. So you can see on the left side here, we have what users are used to in the ECC environment, where we go through the SAP login pad, and we have a listing of transactions, just as you did in the ECC. This also exists in S4HANA. And in fact, both of these illustrations came out of an S4HANA environment. So depending on what your organization has decided on, they'll give you access to either the GUI or the Fiori app. Chances are it's probably going to be both available, you know, and but you also have the Fiori app approach. Each tile represents a transaction. And I should also mention that the Fiori app solution or access is web-based. So it's like going into bringing up a website, and that will then allow you to bring up these various tiles, and each tile here leads to a transaction, recognizing that there might be some information even on the surface of the tile that's giving you some insight into predefined settings already. But then you can drill down into it and process the transactions just like you did, any other transaction. So the other key point I'll make here is that, look, the whole point about the Fiori app is SAP's approach is an attempt to make working or processing data much more accurate and more informative and so forth. And this is a key reason why they would, why SAP recommends you use the tiles. But again, recognize both options are available. So let's go to the next section. So the next section we're going to do is production planning in S4 and PPDS.
All right, awesome. While we're going through this topic, as we go through this topic, can you explain what are the main differences between S4 MRP Live and MRP Classic?
Sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about MRP Classic, just relate that back to MRP that you had in ECC. Okay. Now, in terms of MRP Live, this is a new version of MRP. The whole point is this MRP Live is taking advantage of basically better technology that exists within the SAP system. So in other words, MRP Live, this is what SAP is developing. The whole goal of MRP Live is to replace MRP Classic. The whole point is it's more efficient, it runs faster. The thinking is that you could even run MRP multiple times a day because it's that much faster. Looking at the upper left-hand side, so this is the transaction. This is the selection screen for a new transaction, which is MD01N. And the point is that when you run this transaction, first it replaces MD01, MD02, MD03. So that's running MRP online, running single item multi-level, single item single level. You can do it all within this transaction. And the recommendation is once you end up on the S4 environment, that you only use this transaction, even though the other three transactions I called out will still exist depending on which version of S4HANA that you're running. But also recognize that, well, the key reason I'm making this recommendation is because, look, each material can be planned by one of the three planning engines that we have called out. You know, that planning engine could be MRP Classic, MRP Live, or even PPDS. How do you know which planning engine? And if you run those traditional transactions, guess what? They will plan a material if it's eligible for MRP Classic, but if it's eligible for MRP Live, it will not run. So by running this transaction, the point is there's something called a MRP dispatcher behind the scene. It does a quick evaluation, determine who is the appropriate planning engine for that specific material, and then invokes that logic to make sure that the material gets planned. So that's a key difference in terms of when you migrate from ECC to S4HANA. I'm just going to make a quick sidebar before I let David comment on the other three illustrations we have here. And that sidebar is, you know, so David talked about like planning areas, for example. Yes, it's mandatory, but it's not. I wouldn't get too hung up on this. If you don't use MRP areas today, chances are well, I shouldn't say chances are. The point is when you migrate, all you need to do is specify the plant and things will behave just like the ECC environment. If you're using it today in ECC, the point is that, look, it behaves the exact same way in the S4HANA space, regardless of which planning engine you're using. And then the other key point I'll call out is related to production versions. Again, yes, it's another piece of master data, but it really does not inhibit what you're used to. The whole thing about production version is the point that, look, it's used to derive the appropriate combination of your task list, be it your recipe, routing, and related bill of materials. So Dave, what comments do you have to make from a PPDS perspective?
Well, just briefly, so what you're looking at here is how MRP Live, MD01N, and PPDS interact with each other. So you can have MD01N running, and you can also use the PPDS detailed scheduling tasks. Now, those scheduling tasks are all managed via this. In the bottom right, you can see a number of heuristics. There's anything up to about 80 or 90 different heuristics. These are programs that will calculate a plan based on the different parameters that you're able to adjust. If you look, there's also this multi-level top-down, which we've used recently, which we found very successful in answering a client's business requirement. Next slide, please. Did we skip a slide?
Now we should still be, I go back. But Dave, I mean, looking at the right side of this, you know, when would we be using the multi-level top-down and these heuristics? Like, why would? Yeah.
Good question. Thanks, Eclipse. So we find that the PPDS has a lot of flexibility, and a lot of it can be managed by a scheduler as they run a job. Embedded PPDS has parameters that the scheduler can tweak when they're running a schedule. We have in addition, they have this simulation tool that you can make a copy of your active plan, and you can store it as a version. You can then execute changes on that version, and then once you're happy with it, you can then copy it back, and it becomes your active version. So that simulation tool is very useful. Embedded PPDS is going to take advantage of the HANA database, of course, because it's on S4, but it also has this thing called live cache. And when coupled with the power of the HANA database, those very difficult and complex routines that it runs through are significantly improved in terms of performance. And so things happen quicker. Previously, you couldn't do a lot of these calculations because your system would run too long, and it would generally just stop. So I mentioned the flexibility, which is very, very important across the functionality of the tool. So next slide, please. So Eclipse, can you educate us on what is capacity evaluation and how would businesses use this type of tool in either the S4 or PPDS environment?
Sure, David. Okay, so capacity evaluation, this illustration is also from the S4 HANA environment, and the point is that it looks exactly like what you saw in ECC. So the good news is, look, there is no real change. So you're following your process where MRP has ran. Okay, we know that when MRP runs or MRP live, it's generating these plan orders. This is your supply element. What do I need to produce? How much do I need to produce? And how much capacity is required? And the capacity evaluation is to do exactly that in terms of saying, look, what is my capacity requirement? In this case, I'm looking at, look, in terms of weekly buckets, how much capacity do I need to, on that particular work center or resource versus how much capacity is available. And I execute my process just the way I did in the ECC environment. Okay. If you're using, go ahead.
So in the, can we go to the next slide, please? Sorry.
Right. So on this slide here, this is capacity evaluation from a PPDS perspective. So what we saw on the previous screen was like CM01, CM05, the exact same transactions as before, or you could find a Fiori app that would complement those transactions I just called out, or you have this PPDS capacity evaluation. Again, it's doing the exact same activity in terms of, look, do I have sufficient capacity to meet the production requirements? This one, it's on the PPDS side. The recommendation is, look, if you're doing production planning in PPDS, then use the tool over there. The prime reason for this is like, look, you could be maintaining shifts and profiles over on the PPDS side that's not necessarily visible on the S4 HANA side. And for that reason, you would get different results if you were to use the CM01, CM05. So the recommendation is like luck. If you're doing production planning using PPDS, then use this capacity evaluation. If you're using the solution on the S4HANA side, then continue to use CM01, CM05, or the equivalent Fiori app. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to do this next section here, which is around detailed scheduling in S4HANA or PPDS.
All right. So, Ictaf, what is detailed scheduling, and is it different to capacity planning?
So, so detailed scheduling is we went through the exercise of doing capacity planning, capacity evaluation. The whole point was to identify where we had insufficient capacity. Do we need to move production from one production line to another production line? Do we need to produce inventory much earlier than normal, etc.? The results of that exercise is then reflected here on the planning board. So there's a couple of ways to do finite scheduling or detailed scheduling. The whole point is that once we, by doing this exercise, using the planning board or even a planning table, is to ensure that one, the products that has been dispatched, it's been dispatched in a sequence that's efficient for operations to execute. In other words, we try to minimize the amount of downtime experience. And then the other point is that the results of dispatching the orders, we end up with a realistic production plan in terms of we don't have orders overlapping. Even looking at the illustration, even though we have some orders dispatched, we have a green line below the top row here for Work Center 2. And that green line is saying, hey, yeah, you did some dispatching, but the green is saying you still have a overcapacity, so what's going on? You need to take some action to resolve that conflict. In other words, you can only produce one item at a time. Yes, there might be some exceptions, but under normal circumstances, we would not see any green line there. We would have, again, a realistic production plan.
In the moving from ECC to S4, is that graphical planning board solution in ECC the same as what it is in S4 now, or is it different?
It looks and behaves the same, but then on top of that, there's also a Fiori app that basically does the same thing, and it has a similar look and feel to it. So again, if you think you're going to be going through some dramatic change when moving from ECC to S4HANA, the answer is no. You have this particular transaction, like this is like CM25, for example, or CM21. The point is those transaction codes exist if you go through the login pad. And if you use the Fiori apps, you also have basically the same illustration that's showing here from a Fiori app perspective. Let's go to the next slide, please. And of course, we have the PPDS side of it. Basically, it's so if you're using the PPDS solution, yes, you have also the planning board, just like you had in PPDS. But Dave, I know you can elaborate much more on this.
Yeah, it has some really neat features where a scheduler can flip between different tools. He can say, so my plan needs manual adjustments. So they would click on a little button, or they would call up the manual heuristic, and then they would move the orders around to fit the capacities on a resource that was constrained. They can also click on other heuristics, such as that would actually look at all the order base over a period of time, whatever's in their range that they want to tackle, and they can then ask the system to find a spot for a planned order that may be overdue. You can do this thing called top-down or bottom-up planning, where it starts with the order, a process order that is created for a parent, and it will find all the related components to that end item and find, you know, suitable slots that is optimizing your planning. So it has a power in it to do very complicated and time-consuming tasks, which make it a really, really useful tool. And PPDS, right? So what are we on? Slide 17?
Correct. That's the slide we're on right now.
Okay, so yeah.
Hey, I know you and I were having a conversation in the past, and you talked about optimization. You know, what does that mean? You know, aren't the results you have here on the board already optimized?
Yeah, no, you optimize, try to always optimize your plan, right? But when you run these heuristics in PPDS, it doesn't give you the guaranteed optimal, perfect, most rational solution. What it does, it just works you towards an optimal, perfect solution. And then what you do is that you have this other tool, which is called the optimizer. It has its own little engine as well. So it'll take your data and it'll throw in other parameters, which, you know, could consider factors such as safety stock costs or storage costs, or if you deliver late, what is that going to cost you? All of those are then factored into factored in by the PPDS optimizer. So it is working you towards the most best solution that the system can figure out. What more on that? I think that's it on optimizers, right? Eclipse.
Okay, no, thanks for that feedback. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, so with that, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so so that's it for in terms of what to expect when we go from ECC to S/4HANA. You can see some things have been reshuffled, and yet you know, the point is you don't have to freak out because a lot of the solutions that you're used to from your legacy solution, you will find that sitting over in the S4 environment. So with that, we hope that you understand how the different flavors of the ECC production planning solution, how that fits into the S4HANA environment, recognizing that we had legacy, we had PPDS, we had MRP, versus when you go into S4HANA, yeah, you'll find like PPDS, MRP Classic, MRP Live, and then there's even a couple of others like DDMRP and so forth, which we'll expand on future sessions. The other key point is, the fact is we have two different key production planning solution, right? We talked about PPDS versus the S4HANA side. How do they integrate with each other? Do they integrate, not integrate? So hopefully you have a flavor of this based on what we just finished describing. Recognize that, look, the MRP logic, right? There's two different sets of logic that we have out there. Hence, we have the classic. Classic covers everything we find in ECC, recognizing that SAP intends to phase that out once the MRP Live is up, and I shouldn't say up and running because it is up and running, but once it has all the functionality needed to run, to do your MRP runs, all the different scenarios. Right now, it only covers a subset of the MRP Classic logic. Don't lose focus on the importance of having accurate master data in terms of a bill of materials, routings, production versions, which aligns with your business rules. The whole point is that regardless of which solution, right, be it ECC or S4HANA or PPDS, when MRP runs, you want it to generate supply objects, which is a pretty good representation of what takes place on the production floor. It may not have the timing right, which is then covered with a subsequent planning activity, the detailed scheduling activity. But ideally, we should just have those plan orders already sitting out there. So it's just a matter of dispatching them to meet the business requirements, fulfilling customer orders, customers being external customers as well as internal customers. And the other key point is, look, just don't dabble, commit to the production planning functionality that makes sense of your business. If you find yourself using like a spreadsheet, for example, key question is, why are you using a spreadsheet? Highlight that fact to your consultants so that they can, one, diagnose what gap exists. How do we fix that gap? So that you can do production planning directly in SAP, regardless of which solution, because there's just so much benefit to doing it in that single source of truth versus, you have one set of information sitting on a spreadsheet, something totally different sitting out on a sitting in SAP, and it just leads for miscommunication and problems within your supply chain. Okay, and on that, it's a wrap.
Back to you, Kelly.
Thanks, you guys. That was a lot of good information around the production finite scheduling features that are available in ECC and S4. So a lot of good information here. We do have a couple questions from the audience. If you have a few more minutes. So we have the first question is, when is the best time to prepare production planning and scheduling master data for migration from your legacy system to S4HANA?
So we recommend that this is done in your legacy SAP system. A key reason for this is the fact that, look, you have a lot of history that's sitting in your legacy system. There are reports that you can run to do analysis of your historical transactions, basically to identify what went well, what didn't go so well. It could be in terms of production timing, production execution, to material usage variance, to what kind of issues do we have in achieving our production plan in a timely manner so that we are not disappointing customers. So because all this history is sitting there and there are reports there to aid with that process, recommendation is to do it in your legacy system, then determine what parameters we need to adjust, tweak those parameters in your legacy system, and then continue to monitor to ensure you're getting the desired results. And by doing that, then it's just a matter of picking up that data and sending it through the data migration process, and then you're getting much better results in your new environment, your S4HANA environment. So that's the ideal solution. Of course, you could also do things like, do the modification during the data migration process, but you just lose so much value in terms of you don't get to see the results of those changes before you bring it over. It's almost like you're making the changes and then saying, good luck, and I will monitor the results in my new environment. So that's a key reason why we would say, look, get it done in your legacy system. It will help your data migration process go so much smoother and bring over much better quality information into your new environment.
Great, thanks, Ecliph, for expanding on that. And the next question from our audience is, does MRP Live and MRP Classic use the same transactions?
So that's a yes or no answer. It's yes in terms of luck. There's a new transaction. It's MD01N. Use that transaction regardless of which engine is planning it, and the material will get planned. You'll even get a result, a planning result that shows you which engine planned that material. Was it PPDS? Was it MRP Live? Was it MRP Classic? If you go and touch, like MD, users would typically use like MD02 or MD03. You use that transaction, it's a hit or miss. And because it's a hit or miss, you're just setting yourself up for frustration. So park those old transactions, those legacy transactions. Yes, they still exist. They still exist for good reasons, but focus on the MD01N. And one of the key points I should make is, there's always been talk about grumbling about MRP less. So many companies, and including Reveal, we put a lot of emphasis on the MRP list. Recognize that the MRP list goes away if that material is planned by MRP Live or if it's planned by PPDS. So don't, just because you may find some MRP list out there, don't rely on that to determine if a material got planned or not. There's other tools out there to tell you whether or not it got planned. Relying on the MRP list will again lead to disappointment.
Thanks, Eclipse. The last question that we have is, how easy is it to use PPDS in the embedded S4 version?
I'll have a go at that one. Yeah, I think once, like any system that you introduce to a client, there's a change element where you have to teach the users how to, what buttons to press. As Eclipse said earlier, the master data has to be clean, has to be well orchestrated. But once you're actually in the system and you're familiar with the tools and how they work, it is a relatively easy system to use. A lot of the functionality is user driven, so the user can decide what he wants to see. I mean, some people would say it's less than optimal, but in certain scenarios, a planner or a master scheduler may want to see different sets of data, and you know what? They can make that decision when they execute a transaction. The alerts themselves, there are any number of alerts that a user can use, but those alerts can also be tweaked. If you only want to see a certain set of data, you can actually set it up to do that. Once you've learned those rules, you'll find that this PPDS is a relatively easy system to use.
Thanks, David. That was actually our last question for the day. So I just want to let everybody know about our upcoming webinar, and that is going to be Wednesday, June 21st on the business guide to S4 versus ECC extended warehouse management. And then this webinar is going to explore key differences between ECC's warehouse management functionality and then EWM. We'll highlight key challenges with the migration, discuss strategy, and outline the business value potential unlocked by the EWM. So this webinar will actually be available for everyone to listen to on our website later today. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, we will send out the information for the next webinar soon. So thanks again for everybody for joining us for today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.